Hi, Marco. Hi, Mary.
Hello, everyone. I'll take
Hello,
that as my
everyone.
cue.
Well, I am going to start.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Writing for Humans and Robots, Rules for Content, with our guest speaker, Mary Osman. I will introduce you, Mary, in a moment, but we're so glad to have you here today.
I'm so glad to be asked to be here. So thank you.
Thank you. So real quick, I want to say a couple of words about GreenGeeks for those of you who are not familiar with us. We're a 300% green energy web hosting provider, which essentially means we put back 3 times the amount of energy we consume into the grid in the form of renewable energy. We have been recognized by the US EPA since 2009 as Green Power Partner, and we offer share hosting, reseller hosting, VPS, and dedicated server. Now, moving on to the webinar, if you have any question that you can think of during the webinar, you can put them in the Q&A, and Maddie will be answering at the end of the presentation. You are welcome to chat in the chat room. We had asked at the beginning, where are you from? We'd love to know where you're logging in from. And remember to select everyone if you want everyone to see what you're discussing. And we will be recording this as always. So if you have to step away, don't worry about anything, because we will send you the recording in the next couple of days. So also today, we have enabled live transcription. So you have the ability to enable them during the webinar by going to live transcript and then show subtitles. So I'm going to introduce the team today with us from GreenGeeks. Hi, Marco. Do you want to say hi?
Hi, I'm Marco Berrocal. I am a WordPress developer out of Costa Rica, and excited to be here. I think I know Maddie. I'm not sure. I think we might have bumped into a WordCamp previously. I'm not 100%.
I think we might have. I think we might have.
Yeah. So I'm excited to have you here, and well, I leave the floor to you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marco. So just a few words about Maddie. Maddie is a digital native with a decade-long devotion to creating engaging, accessible, and relevant content. She taught herself web design at age 11. That's impressive, Maddie. But then very impressive. She then found her true passion in content creation, which is also my passion, and learning the intricacies while transitioning from technical to creative SEO marketer. Maddie became a freelance writer and then founder and CEO of the Blacksmith. And now Maddie is joining us from Denver, right?
That's right.
Do you want to
say warm here?
Do you want to say hi and just start the presentation?
Sure. Yeah. Let me get my slides queued up here. Just a second. And then I'll kind of do more of an introduction. Okay, so we'll just go to the next slide. So yeah, great introduction. Not a whole lot to add. I'll just say that my company, The Blacksmith, is a data-driven content agency. We work primarily with B2B technology brands, probably a lot of names that you'd recognize in the WordPress world, whether that's a host or a plugin or some other sort of like integration tool. We love writing about WordPress. And I think more than that, we love translating complicated topics into something that the layperson can understand. And one thing that, I noticed over the course of the pandemic, especially at the beginning, was that there were a lot of people who moved their businesses more online, who, maybe had a retail storefront, or maybe they even had some sort of like online components. But I'm sure you noticed that too at GreenGeeks. A lot of small business owners and things like that have increasingly gone to the web by really the necessity of the pandemic and being able to offer contactless delivery and other solutions. And so a lot of the content that we've been writing at the Blacksmith is really for these small business operators and maybe their teams in order to help them get online. So, I love these types of topics. And I would say that working with clients like that is really what inspired the book that this presentation is based on. It's called Writing for Humans and Robots: The New Rules of Content Style. I'll share a little bit more at the end about how to get that book. In the meantime, on my Twitter, which is @MaddieOsmond, which you can see in the corner there, I've shared my slides, so feel free to download those and follow along. I've also shared a link to the Blacksmith style guide, which I'm going to frequently reference here, which you might want to reference whether you have a style guide or not. It might be a useful tool to build your own. And I'm hoping that this presentation today inspires you to do just that. So let's go ahead and kind of kick this off. And I wanted to start really by explaining why this topic. Why am I giving a presentation on this topic? And it kind of starts from the point where I began freelancing to now I'm kind of running more of a business with an agency model with the team. But here's how I got from there to here, and here's how that's relevant to you today. So when I was a freelancer, I took on basically as many clients as I could realistically without going insane. And I started to hit a wall in terms of available time, energy. I just knew that I had kind of approached the limit of what I could do all by myself. And so from there, I started to hire some people to help me. And initially, it was working with virtual assistants to do things like prepare outlines, to help with like the research side of things, to sort of atomize that content creation process and give me a leg up so that when I was doing the writing, it was an easier process and it was less on the front end and more on the back end of, making things sound good, putting it together, but not doing all of the research myself. And so from there, I started to work with some writers. And then I was kind of their editor. And I just knew that with each stage, I was becoming a bottleneck in kind of a new way. But at the same time, I kind of had to feel out what each stage of the process meant, what was the process involved in these different aspects of content creation, so that I could then document it and delegate it to other people. And so started working with some writers, but again, kind of hit a wall of like, well, I can only edit so many pieces a day. And also, I don't necessarily want to be the editor. It's just kind of the role that I needed to take in that moment or at that stage of building the business. And so eventually what happened is I hired an editor and we worked together to define what my style is and kind of the frequent edits that were coming up that we didn't want to keep having come up, basically. And we started to put together a rudimentary version of the Blacksmith style guide, which, as I've shared in this slide, it really takes a lot of inspiration from AP style, which you might be familiar with. It's kind of news journalism. It's really the foundational standard for that type of style. The main difference, I would say, between AP style and the Blacksmith style guide is that ours is more attuned for online content. AP style covers it, but it's not focused on it. So that's the difference, is that we're focused on it. So I hired that editor. She helped me build out the style guide and she helped me to reinforce it. And then really, once we had gotten that started, I felt comfortable bringing on more editors so that I could just completely outsource that part of the process to them and know that it was covered. And so really the Blacksmith style guide, it started from humble beginnings. It started as a very basic document. Today, it is over 30 pages long, including double spacing. But the point I kind of want to make here is that it's better to just get started than to be super focused on the end result, because the end result, I don't think I'm there yet. And it's taken me years to get this far. And what's better is if you create kind of a working document that you can build on over time. So that's all I'm trying to say here. So yeah, really the style guide, once it was established, once it was, in progress, that's what allowed my business to scale to new heights. In addition to, of course, the processes that I documented and delegated and all that stuff, but without being able to sort of duplicate my brain in a way, the way that I want to do things in a systematic way, then it would not have been possible for the Blacksmith to create consistent, high quality content according to my style. Without it, it would be a shot in the dark. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to share with everybody today. And I'll give you some examples of that as we move on. So you've probably heard a couple of reasons why proper style is worth bothering with, but I want to give you a couple more. First, and really my main reasoning is just to get the team on the same page, because really it reduces time spent on edits moving forever forward into the future. The more effort you put into documenting any process up front, it will save you down the road, because everybody's on the same page and you can refer back to the style guide. I mean, I think another great thing about having a style guide is it makes the editing, the feedback giving process a lot less personal. It's not, oh, you did this wrong. It's, oh, this is what our style is, so this is what it needs to change to. So that's a big thing. I think another big thing is that it allows you to demonstrate professionalism and expertise around content publishing. Something that comes up a lot in sort of like the web development world and design and stuff like that is the idea of the user experience. And I think there are a lot of conscious and subconscious things that happen when somebody interacts with content or with a design. And I think subconsciously style factors into how people trust you, because if you look at, let's say, 2 articles from a brand side by side, and there are differences in how they approach headings or formatting or how they incorporate links or whatever it is, I think all of those things subconsciously lead to a lack of trust. And it's almost worse that it's subconscious, that it's not something that they can immediately identify, because then people are not sure why they don't trust you. And so a style guide, again, helps to standardize things and present yourself professionally and on brand. I mean, that's the other reason to make a style guide, is to say, this is what our brand does, versus just using something like AP Style, which is a great foundation, but is not representative of your brand. And then on a related note, a style guide allows you to effectively reach your target audience in terms of things like defining your brand voice, understanding your audience and codifying how you can approach them in the style guide in terms of things like what reading level, should you optimize for, word choice. So let's keep moving forward. Just a couple more things about style guides in general, and then we'll jump into a little bit more of the tactical piece here. But wanted to quickly define, who are these guidelines for? I think of kind of 3 main audiences, and it's probably not exhaustive, but first of all, it's freelance writers or like agencies like the Blacksmith who work with clients. So anybody who's working with a client to represent their brand. We have obviously the Blacksmith style guide, but many of the brands we work with also have their own style guides that we're kind of combining for something that best represents their brand. It's also people like content managers and other in-house content team members. So people on the client, on the brand side, who all want to be on the same page. And again, to help reduce those edits over time. And then it's also creators who make content for their own projects. So maybe you don't work with a brand, maybe it's only you on the content team, but you still want to be able to have that consistent approach to content, so that, again, you're not creating this like subconscious, untrustworthy experience that people can't quite put their finger on what's wrong, but they know that something's wrong. And, lastly, on this topic, we'll just define what a style guide is, which I probably should have started with. But at any rate, a brand style guide is to reference your writers and editors, and your clients might also want to have access to it, just so that they know kind of, where you're starting from. All these people can use to understand how and why to do things a certain way on behalf of the brand. It's just a document to make that clear, basically. And depending on the mediums that you're creating content for, you might have one style guide. You might have multiple style guides, or you might have different sections within your style guide to discuss how you do things differently say, for example, on your blog versus social media. And the Blacksmith does have a separate social media style guide because we want to be able to accurately and repeatedly be able to give direction for the person who's helping us with social media in terms of things like how we use hashtags, image guidelines, how to respond to people in a way that is on brand for the Blacksmith. And again, there's other things listed here: ebooks, email sequences, web page copy, just all different things to think about in terms of how you're interacting with customers or just members of your audience, and how things change across those different mediums. The core like brand voice remains the same. It's the formatting and the visuals, and to some extent the conversation that changes amongst them. So again, start small. Don't overwhelm yourself by trying to do all of this at once. Start with your core brand styles, and then you can branch out to these other things. So I wanted to talk about these kind of two audiences in this webinar here that we're going to discuss. So one is the human, which is really the most important audience because humans are the ones that can actually buy what you're selling. And furthermore, humans are the ones that respond to empathy, the parts of us that are human in each of us. And so humans are who you're trying to appeal to. That being said, robots play a role. They are the medium that connects these users, the human users, to your content. And so as such, they respond to descriptiveness and intent matching. So we have to be thoughtful in terms of how we are kind of marking up content that robots go on to index so that the right humans find it. And that's important. When we talk about robots, to some extent, we're also talking about like the robots that arrange your news feed on social media. It's a little bit different, but similar concepts. We're mostly talking about Google. When we talk about robot, we're really talking about kind of a search engine spider, but we're also to some extent talking about things like Bing and other search engines. And then one last robot user to consider here are robots such as those that operate GPT-3 tools, which you might have heard about. It's a big topic in the content writing world right now because people are afraid that they're going to take our jobs. I am not worried about that at this point. And I think I'll get into that a little bit later into this presentation when we talk about titles. But all of that's to say that robots can make your job easier. They can help you reach the right audience. They are not something to be afraid of at this point. And so it's better to try to kind of partner with them. So let's talk about how to do that. And let's start with word choice, because I think that's really the most important part of this presentation. So we've talked a little bit about tone of voice and brands. And there's this really excellent article that I would highly recommend everybody on this webinar checks out after the webinar to kind of dig in a little bit more. And so the Nielsen-Norman group defines the 4 dimensions of tone of voice across these 4 spectrums: funny versus serious, formal versus casual, respectful versus irreverent, and enthusiastic versus matter of fact. And what's interesting is that they started with a lot of other words and they kind of categorize them until they got it down to just this bare bones basic spectrum. And so my challenge to you is to start your brand style guide with this and defining where your brand falls on the spectrum. And, you know, maybe it's in the middle, maybe it's to a side, but it's not all the way at the extreme. And that's how the Blacksmith style is. It's kind of all over the place on these different spectrums. And I think this is an important exercise to figure out really what, you know, brand style means for you, or tone of voice rather. And I think that it's really just the start. It's really just a foundation, because ideally after you do this, you kind of go in and think of more specific adjectives to describe your brand. You know, like an example I always think of is like the Wendy's Twitter account is kind of snarky. That doesn't really fit here. It's a little bit sarcastic, which isn't really funny or serious. It's kind of a different thing. And so that's why it's important to add that detail on top of, you know, the bare bones. So then another way to think about word choice is being really thoughtful with your language. And so I want to give a couple examples here about how you could do that. The first one is to be concise and cut fluff. And so most internet readers, they're skimming. And a lot of the guidelines I'm going to give you today are to optimize for that reader experience. The fact that they're probably not going to read, all of your content through like a book, like a textbook or whatever. They're really trying to just find the answer, and they might read other stuff around that if they find the answer, but we want to optimize for creating the best reader experience for them. And so in terms of being concise, those like multi-syllabic words like anti-disestablishmentarianism, like not a good fit for the internet because it's just too much. And we're going to talk about the Flesch Reading Ease scale in a bit, which is going to create more guidelines around that. But what I wanted to share in terms of this specifically are some examples. So for cutting fluff, using words like simply or just, it's kind of just like adding too much detail. So instead of something like simply open the app, you would just say open the app, get to the point. So then in terms of this next one, strong verbs versus adjectives, it's better to use kind of like an exact fit verb versus adding that extra, in terms of being concise, this first point. Let me give you an example. So saying something like we're thrilled is better than we're very excited. The very is not really necessary, and there is a more exact word than very excited, which is thrilled. So finally, on this topic for now, is using inclusive language and thinking about that end audience who's reading your content, not wanting to unintentionally alienate them, and understanding that when you're writing for the web, you are writing for a global audience, whether you operate in a specific location or not. Chances are pretty good that people outside of that location are going to see your content, and it's going to reflect your brand, how you communicate, even with people you didn't necessarily intend to. And so when we talk about inclusive language, for one example is to use people first language that doesn't put weight on descriptors over characteristics. So for example, you might refer to someone with a hearing disability as a person who is deaf instead of a deaf person. Just things to think about. Language is so important, and it is something I think nowadays has become even more important. And so just, be very conscious of how you're communicating with your audience. On the flip side, you want to avoid word choice that's bad. So words that insult the reader's intelligence, saying something like obviously or clearly probably comes across a different way than what you might intend when you write them. Most of the articles that the Blacksmith is creating is to help somebody learn something new. So if we're insulting their intelligence by pointing something out like, obviously, this is the way it is, I think that really alienates the reader because it's not obvious to them. Otherwise, they wouldn't be there trying to learn. Also, words with ambiguous meaning. So think of something like the word many without any other descriptor is a lot less clear than 50% of like bankers or students or whatever. Without the context, it doesn't really mean anything. And so another thing is words that just don't add value. So in talking about conciseness, I think this relates to that. But if you say like, fortunately, to start a sentence, it's just another thing that doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't add value. And I'm not sure how you could know what's fortunate to whoever ends up reading your content. I mean, it's just not your experience. So don't, try not to speak on behalf of other people in your writing. Okay, so this is what I was talking about a few minutes ago, the Flesch Reading Ease scale. This is an algorithm. This is an equation that a lot of content optimization tools and also grammar tools like Hemingway, for example, use to understand the reading level of your content, or the average reading level of your content. And in general, you want to aim for about 7th to 8th grade reading level, just in general for the internet. Which speaks again to that idea of not using multisyllabic words, not having super complicated sentences. I can't remember if I talk about this in this presentation or not, but at the Blacksmith, we define sentences, or we say that sentences shouldn't be more than 2 lines. If they are, it should probably be broken up into multiple sentences because it's on the verge of a run-on. We also say that in general, paragraphs shouldn't be more than like 3 lines or so. And the reason why is it makes things more readable. It creates white space. It's a lot easier for an online reader to skim if things are broken up versus like a wall of text. It's also just a better reader experience. And I think that when we're talking about the internet versus like a book, I mean, you would expect a book to have longer sentences and paragraphs. That makes sense for that content medium. What we're talking about though is the internet, where people want things quickly and they want it as decomplicated as possible. So this formula is saying that readability ease is measured by average sentence length compared to the average number of syllables per word. And so the shorter each one is, the lower the average reading level is. And so tools like ClearScope or like Content Surfer or Surfer SEO, I think it's just called Surfer now, they, based on whatever keyword you input from your keyword research that you're trying to optimize content for, they will suggest a target reading level based on the currently ranking content, and you should keep that in mind. So I'm saying 7th to 8th grade is a good place to try for, but your specific audience or the audience for the keywords that you're going after might be different. So it's just worth keeping that in mind as you figure it out. Okay, so let's talk about formatting. And what I want to do is a little bit of a pop quiz. You could put this in the chat if you want, or you could just keep it to yourself. It's your choice. But I want you to take a look at this example here and try to figure out how many instances of parallelism there are, which just means what is consistent amongst each of these bullet points, basically, because the reason, I guess, is formatting is important. I think if there are errors in formatting, it's another one of those subconscious things that work against trust. So I'm just going to put it there for a couple seconds, and then I will show you the answers, and then we'll probably kind of flip back and forth so that you can see what I'm talking about. So I'm going to go ahead and do it. These are the answers. So I found at least 6 examples of parallelism, and there might be more, and really like the number 2 is kind of like 2 examples of parallelism, but let's kind of go through this. So first of all, the label for each step always has bold formatting. That's step 1, step 2, step 3. 2, each step is labeled to show that it's part of the same sequence, step 1, step 2, step 3, and is followed by that colon. 3, specific user interface elements, which the reader is instructed to interact with, also have bold formatting. So that's settings, reading, it's consistent. The word following the step number is an action verb. So log in, navigate, click. The text after the colon is capitalized, and then each bullet point ends with a period. So you can imagine that, like, if these things were not consistent, it would look sloppy. And another thing that we talk about at the Blacksmith is if you have one bullet list that follows a certain type of formatting, I would say the most common thing that we're focused on is like whether it has periods at the end of each point, then other bullet lists within the same article should follow that formatting. In general, we don't usually have periods at the end of bullet lists because bullet lists tend to be more incomplete thoughts, not full sentences. But what we're saying is that in the Blacksmith style guide, as we've defined it to be consistent, if one list does that, then other lists within the same article should. And so it seems like such a minor detail. It is kind of a minor detail, but I'm saying it's going to make the difference between that subconscious trust factor working for you or against you. So let's talk about spelling. I love the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's one of my favorite books, written by Dale Carnegie. And if you haven't read it, the context that you need about it is basically that it's a book about how to win friends and influence people. It's about networking. It's about relationship building. It's a good one. And I'm sure many of you have read it because it is just, it is just the best. But so Dale Carnegie talks about a person's name is to that person the sweetest, most important sound in any language. So think about that, like, for yourself. I mean, I have people emailing me all the time, even though my email is Maddie with a Y at the Blacksmith, Maddie IE, and it just frustrates the hell out of me. But what can you do? But obviously, to those people that are emailing me, like, they don't care if they spell my name right. And as a result, I don't really care about getting back to them in a timely manner. So all I'm trying to say is that it's such a personal, important thing to have your name spelled right. And I want to, like, really drill down this point with this example, which is a lot of very commonly misspelled terms that I see all the time. So everybody here, I'm sure, spells WordPress correctly. It's with a capital P. And if you're a developer, you probably know this better than anybody because there's a PHP function you can install on your site, or you can embed in the code or whatever, that will automatically correct for any mistakes that anybody makes with spelling WordPress on that site. But outside of the WordPress world, everybody spells it with a lowercase p. Everybody gets upset about it. I understand that. I think it's annoying too. At the Blacksmith, we even go as far as to say, like, in our style guide, if we're saying, for example, WordPress.com, like the domain name version of it, we still want to capture the correct spelling and capitalization. And spelling and capitalization go beyond capitalization. So it's also punctuation, it's spacing. There's a lot that goes into it. There's a lot that you can mess up. The second one I bet that you've seen this misspelled is HubSpot. So many people spell it with a lowercase s, but it's an uppercase s. I mean, people that write for HubSpot mess this up. And it's just amazing to me because it's such a well-known brand. It's very well known in the digital marketing world, but people still mess it up. And so then finally, what's interesting about Mailchimp is that the proper casing of WordPress and HubSpot don't inform how Mailchimp is supposed to be spelled. So a lot of people spell it wrong or case it wrong with a capital C. It's actually lowercase c. So just like the English language, there are exceptions to every rule, such as when you are mashing two sort of words together to create this, like, SaaS brand name. There are no rules except for to try to get them right. And so one thing that we do at the Blacksmith to avoid the embarrassment of misspelling a brand name that we write for is to use Grammarly has a feature if you use their premium tool with other users. Actually, you might be able to use it for just yourself too. But at the Blacksmith, every editor and every writer has a premium Grammarly account, and they have the style guide feature so that when you're using Grammarly, you can input what the correct spellings are of whatever, but like the brand names that we write about for sure. And then it's automatically a suggestion for them if they miscase, mistype, whatever. So that's something to think about if you're creating a lot of content and you just want to get ahead of the fact that some people spell things wrong consistently, and you don't want to be one of those people. So let's talk about visuals. So they're also really important. So like raise your hand or type in the chat if you've seen this stock photo before, because I feel like it's so notorious. Like, everybody's seen it. I'm seeing at least one raised hand. So I was logging into a tool that I hadn't used in a while, but is a tool that I use in my business. And this image was like the hero image on their homepage. And it just struck me by how, what's the word I'm thinking of? Like, how unpersonalized that is to their brand. It's a free stock photo. Everybody has access to this. It's kind of notorious to the point of, like, turning people off because they know it's a free stock photo. And I guess the point I'm trying to make here is just that while free stock photos are obviously very available, there's nothing on brand about them because anybody could use them. They are not attributable to any brand. What's better is to use things like premium stock photos, something that you have an account to. It's a little bit more gated. There's a little bit less access to it. Less people are using the same images. But I also want to give you some other ideas as well. And I'll show you some like examples, but this is just a list. So let's dive into the examples. It's not going to play, but first of all, thinking about having or using relevant GIFs or GIFs, if that's your thing, whatever. But it doesn't work for every brand, because going back to that idea of voice and tone, if you are, a formal brand, you're kind of more professional in your dealings in your web communications, it's not a bad thing, but you're probably not going to throw in GIFs or memes, right? That being said, if you have a tool that you're trying to show people how to use, and you have kind of a quick action that you want to show, recording a GIF of that action might be on brand for you. So, different parts of the spectrum. Also embedding relevant YouTube videos. And I think that some people think that you can't use video, or they just assume like, I wouldn't use video because I'm not making it, but you don't necessarily have to create videos in order to embed them on your website. So if there is something that's relevant and related and can add value, then the great thing about video is it increases time on page. It increases kind of like the attention metrics of people, which is a good thing. So it doesn't have to be your video. But I guess it's also worth saying that when you create content, you can think about repurposing it into different mediums. In video, maybe you even start with a video, and that's kind of like the prompt for the writer, like their brief, and then they write the article, and then they embed the video, and then maybe you also rip the audio, and that's a podcast. I mean, that's way oversimplifying things, but just to be thinking about different content mediums, because different people learn in different ways. Another thing is branded statistics. This one's from Statista. You could also, make your own statistics if you have data that you have access to, and you attribute that data in the branded statistic you make. But I think that statistics are something that get shared a lot if you have great data. And so, if it's something that you've created and it has your logo on it, then that's something that could help, create more brand visibility for you, maybe backlinks and things like that. And we previously used the free version of Statista, but recently upgraded to a premium account. And the reason why, if you're creating a lot of content, it's going to really cut down on the time you spend researching, because you don't have to hunt down original data sources for everything. Statista is trustable and points back to the original data. So that's something that if you're creating a lot of content could be useful to you. If you do things like expert roundups or expert interviews, where you're asking experts to contribute some thoughts to your content, creating something that is a graphic that they can share with their quote, with their headshot, maybe with their name and their title and stuff like that, the company they represent, is something that you can create templates for and reuse constantly. And it creates more shareability, kind of like I've said. Another thing on the note of like taking screenshots and sharing examples is I've created several articles where it's like a roundup of like this one was from an article about the emails that you get after you make a purchase, and like how are those brands using them to reinforce their brand or upsells or the customer experience in some way. So that's another great way to use images, is to grab examples that you can share. What I'm trying to say right now is just that using good quality images doesn't have to come down to having to make all of them yourself and from scratch, lots of graphic design. That is something you could do, and that is something that will make an impact, but it's not the only option you have. So yeah, we talked about screenshots. Another idea, especially in the WordPress world, is to share use cases with screenshots and annotating them. So if you're talking about how to do something within the WordPress dashboard, being able to highlight that, point to it, even label it, might be of use to your audience. And I think the other thing with this is that if you are a WordPress brand, creating really solid how-to articles and like knowledge-based articles is really going to help you when it comes to customer service, like support tickets, because if you're addressing the things that most commonly come up in your customer support queries, you're probably going to get a lot less of them, or you can just send them the articles that you've already created that have a lot of detailed direction and it's just ready to go. You might also use tools like Canva or agencies. We work with Design Pickle, so I do have a review on my site. We also work with another agency called Easily. And so at any rate, it's just about kind of creating like these different brand profiles. What are your fonts, your main and accent colors, your logo, etc. And, you know, having a design agency that you work with is just a nice resource because we don't really specialize in design. We know about it. We appreciate it. We don't necessarily do it. And so having a resource for that is incredibly valuable to create really great content. So we're almost done here. I think I have one section after this, but kind of bringing this back to robots is you have your images, but then you have to upload them, name them, label them in a way that a robot can understand. And so in terms of how you do that is incorporating your primary keyword or keywords into key signal areas. It starts with the file name. It's the title. In WordPress, at least, it automatically generates. You don't really have to mess with that if you've named your file correctly. And then the alt text. What's important to understand is that alt text is ultimately here because it helps screen readers who help people with access issues, like if they're blind, it helps them to be able to understand the context of that image because they can't see it. So whatever descriptive text you use should actually describe the image for that intended purpose. The added benefit is that it also describes it for the search engine spiders. If you are, you know, implementing your keyword and all that, it makes it a little bit more findable. All right, this is the last section. So in talking about titles and how to understand that from like this human and robot perspective, we talked about GPT-3 tools at the very beginning of this presentation. And what I think that GPT-3 tools do a really great job of is coming up with ideas, title ideas, a content outline, blurbs, you know, whatever, like maybe like an intro or something. The thing is, you can't just leave it at that. So like, that's why I don't think GPT-3 tools can like finish the process. I think they can start it. I think they can spark your own ideas. And so what I would say is kind of the ideal process for generating titles is to maybe start with a GPT-3 tool, come up with a bunch of ideas, then refine them with your own human empathy elements, okay? And then this slide is talking about different tools you can use to analyze your titles. So there's this co-schedule headline analyzer. The middle one is, it's like the emotional marketing value analyzer. And then the other one is Sharethrough's headline analyzer tool. A lot of them are very similar in terms of their outputs. They just give a little bit different of detail and a little bit different of prompts to make changes. But it helps you to just sort of see, like, are the words you're using as effective as you think they are? And again, this is kind of a robotic element too. Like it doesn't really replace the feedback of the actual people who read your content. But this is how we can use technology to be as prepared as possible for publishing. And then from the human and the robot side really is thinking about your SEO titles. So that's what shows up on the search engine results page after you enter in a keyword, hit enter, and you see the results. So to compel people to click through, you might think about using different descriptors in your title, like, first of all, what is it? An infographic, a video, a podcast. You might also, let's just say you're a content creator who does a lot of like affiliate marketing stuff, and maybe you have reviews for different products, and maybe you even have a special discount code. So you could add an information bracket that describes that to sort of compel people to check out your review over somebody else's because they know that they're going to get a discount. Another thing is those lists of, like, you know, the best rules for SEO in 2020 or whatever, or 2022, I guess we're at. But having an information bracket that shows people when this essential list was last updated so that they know if it's really relevant to the research that they're doing today. And then you might also say if there's some sort of like useful thing that they're going to get out of it, like a template or a checklist. I think this is the last section. It's just talking about using Google search features to inform how you're creating content. So if you don't have access to a tool like Ahrefs or SEMrush or Moz or whatever to do your keyword research, those are the gold standard. I understand that it's not necessarily affordable to the average small business owner or somebody who doesn't create content day in, day out like I do. So one thing that you could do is use Google search data to fill in some of the gaps. It's not going to be an exact match, but it will help to at least inform how you want to go about creating content. And so the first thing in the top right is Google Autocomplete. It's what you see when you type in your keyword, and it basically uses that long tail, your exact keyword, and then it adds descriptors onto it. And so these might be things that you want to add to the piece that you're writing. It might be other pieces that you could write along a similar nature. In the bottom left, we see people also ask, which after you hit enter, when you make a search, is in the top middle of the page. And these are questions that searchers are actually asking. All of this is based on actual search data. That's why it's useful. And these are things to try to cover in your content because this is what people want to know. So it's kind of like, it's like a gift from Google, basically, this section more than any of the others. They might also be good featured snippet opportunities, which is kind of outside the scope of what we're talking about today, but something to check up on in the book if you want to learn more. And then the last thing here in the bottom right is related searches. It used to be called searches related to, but they recently changed it. It's kind of like autocomplete, except for the difference is it doesn't use that same long tail keyword. It's a slightly different variation of the terms. So again, these might be things that you want to focus on in this content, or they are future content topic ideas to link to in the future. There's also different tools that you can use to get more out of Google search data. So keywords everywhere is one. It's a Chrome extension. It might be a Firefox extension too. And then Surfer has Keyword Surfer. Both of those are freemium, so you can get access without paying for the tools, but you can also use a paid plan and get a little bit more out of them. So a lot of things you can do within Google search to figure out what people want to learn and how they are searching for those topics. Okay, so if you have any questions after today, I will be taking questions, as we wrap here, but if you have any after today, you can email me at maddie@theblacksmith.com. And I'm also probably most active on Twitter, so you can also hit me up there. And then if you liked what we talked about today and want to dig in a whole lot deeper, then grab your copy of my book. It's called Writing for Humans and Robots, The New Rules of Content Style. You can pre-order it on Kindle right now. The print version will not be available until July 18th. So if you would prefer that, then just add it to your wish list for now. And so with all that being said, I am done and ready for any questions that you might have.
I see in the chat, Jorge Rojas is asking if it's possible to get a copy of this presentation. Is it possible to email it with the video when we send it recorded? A link to this?
Yeah, so you can definitely grab the slides from my Twitter right now using that @Maddie Nesman. And then you guys are planning on, I think, sharing it on YouTube, right?
Yes, we're gonna send an email to everyone with the video, like the recording, and then we'll also put it on our YouTube channel.
Perfect. Okay, I think I see another question here from Ingrid. Okay, so she says, what is your best advice for a beginning blogger to make their blog not look like a beginner? Maybe I have like a counterintuitive answer to this. Somebody in one of the groups that I'm in asked the other day, like, how to get experience, like, what would you do if you were just starting now or something like that with blogging? And my answer to them was start your own blog and just play around. And that's exactly what I did before I went out to freelance full time. I started a Chicago lifestyle blog. That's where I used to live. I was really involved in the blogger community there. And I just kind of played around with everything, with design, with content, with formatting. I got some of my friends to submit their own content based on the things that they were interested in. And so I learned a lot about how to sort of manage this like editorial production that also had this design aspect and all that. And so I think like what I'm trying to say is don't be too worried about looking like a beginner if you are a beginner, because everybody has to start somewhere. And like another way that I can like live what I'm saying in that is I recently started a YouTube series that's been just like very piecemeal, and you know, whenever I can kind of get around to it. And there's always like one technical issue, like every time I go into filming. And I just say, you know what, I just want to get through it. I just want to publish something. I just want to get consistent. And that's what I'm worried about. So very counterintuitive answer to the question. I guess the only other thing that I can say is just be a student of the people that you think are killing it in the blogging space and doing a great job, and take some notes. What is it about it that strikes you about that content and that design and their word choice and, you know, whatever it is, to just do that. Marco, you have your hand up.
I actually do. You know, it's the question also applies to a lot of what you do in your professional career, because I remember having that exact same concern. I mean, how do I not look like a beginner? But I ultimately think it's unavoidable, and it's also very a productive exercise to look back at what you've done a few years from that date.
Totally.
And you see the progress that you've made. And you know, I think that once you overcome that hurdle of not being too concerned about it, it's a really, I think it's a good stage to be in. But it's also a good stage to be a beginner and less sure about everything, because you have to tread with a lot of passion and curiosity, I think. And yeah.
No, you bring up a lot of great points. Another like applicable piece here is at the middle of this year, I guess, right before this, I did a watercolor class, which is something that I've like started practicing on my own at home, but never had formal instruction for. And I told the instructor something like, you know, I was working on it this weekend and I just like, you know, threw out whatever I made because I wasn't happy with it. And he's like, no, you have to save, you know, your worst pieces so that you can see the progress that you made.
Exactly. Yeah,
so
exactly.
To your point, I mean, it's okay to have that ugly first draft. And I think the thing with blogging in general too is like, it's not print. So it doesn't have to live on forever. If you did make a mistake, you have the benefit of correcting it. And I think that, I don't know if this is a good way to say it or not, but it's almost like the standards are kind of lower for exactness around grammar and spelling or whatever. People have a little bit more forgiveness for that in the blogging medium
Correct.
versus the print medium.
Correct.
Let's see if there's anything else. Let's see, there's
a question in the Q&A, yes.
Yes. Okay. So Chris asked, just wanted to ask about images. I love the pic about the women in coconuts, but some might be offended. It's a delicate balance, right? Yeah. And I mean, it also depends on like, what's the topic you're writing about, right? Because it was totally appropriate for the topic about the first email you get after making a purchase or whatever, like that shipping confirmation email or whatever it is. Like, it fit that. And it also, like, I'm just remembering the examples that I put in that article. It was a nice balance for some of the other things that were a little bit more straightforward, by the books, kind of boring, you know, like I think it's something that it keeps people reading, right? And that's the thing. It is a delicate balance. Know your audience, but also like, maybe don't be afraid to get a little controversial here and there within reason. That's what keeps people interested. That's what gets them talking.
That's
as long
great.
as it's on brand.
Thank you, Maddie.
Absolutely.
I don't see any other question,
I don't either.
but yeah, but we will be emailing this recording, and you said that this slide deck is available on your Twitter account, on your
Yes, and the email that I sent you, the link there is the same link. So if you want to include that in the follow-up email, then that's totally great.
Yeah, we will do that for everyone.
Perfect.
Thank you.
All right. Well, yeah, thanks everybody for joining. I hope it gave you something to think about, and, you know, open to any feedback you have or any style rules that you're considering implementing at your company. I'd love to hear as you figure it out.
Thank you. And thank you everybody for attending, and thank you, Mark,
you.
for your help. Thank you, Maddie, for
worries.
the great presentation.
Thanks. Al.
And keep following our webinars. You can find them at GreenGeeks.com/webinars, very simple. And we will see you at the next one. Thank you,
Boom.
everyone. Have a great rest of
Bye-bye.
your day.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye-bye.